So we're continuing straight from what we did last week, inshallah ta'ala. Just to finalize the what we were talking about, which is the sources of tafsir, and then we'll do a deep dive into one specific topic, inshallah ta'ala. So that way, next week we can begin the tafsir. We'll have everything ready, and when we'll have the presentation as well, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So, we said the sources of tafsir up until this point. We're on number 4. But source number 1, just as a recap, was the Quran itself. Because the Quran a lot of times refers to itself in different areas and whatnot. Source number 2 is the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ himself, direct statements that he makes, etc. Source number 3 is the companions, the Sahabah, simply because it was talking to them, it's referring to them, you know what I mean? It's in their language. There's a lot of sources this way. Source number 4 is where we've reached. And remember, we mentioned about the Sahaba themselves that they could potentially differ with one another. And that a lot of times the differences that we find eventually that have reached us, especially inter-madhab differences, a lot of times actually emanate from the Sahaba, the companions themselves. And because many of these companions went to different geographical areas, this is why different geographical areas have different differences in fiqh and application and whatnot, because of the Sahaba who went to those areas and whatnot, and their students. So, source number 4 is at-tabi'in, the successors, which is an extension of the companions, right? A lot of times we don't, so how much, so this is, we're going to retract a little bit. How much of the Quran refers to the Quran itself? There's a few, but it's not all of it, right? You won't get everything that you could, especially when, definitions, etc. You might not get that much. How many ahadith do we have of the Prophet ﷺ directly making tafsir of Quran? There's a few, but there's not a lot. Like the Prophet ﷺ did not, like, how we sit down and we do a tafsir. He never did that for entire surahs. There are entire surahs in which the Prophet ﷺ didn't do a tafsir of. Why? Because for a lot of the companions, especially for the audience, it's clear. It doesn't need tafsir. It's huwa mufassar aslan. Yani it's clear, it's straightforward. You know what I mean? So a lot of times, and this is the beauty of the Quran, is that it is straightforward, it's accessible to everybody, etc. So the Prophet ﷺ, there's certain things where the Prophet ﷺ had to clarify what it means, but certain things it's just clear. We don't have to overcomplicate it, is what I'm saying. Because if we think, remember, there was that danger that if we think that I cannot understand the Quran unless somebody makes, a tafsir of every single verse, this is also incorrect, because there's nothing that actually has stated this, neither the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba, right? However, if you don't understand, you're not sure, you get some help, scholarly help is good. Which is why, so what I'm trying to say here is that what we're about to do, these deep dives in tafsir, are okay, they're good, but can a person still be fine without these deep? Of course they can. You know what I mean? Is the deeper understanding good? Yes. Is it necessary? This is our, you know what I mean? So I would never say that you have to do it this way in order to understand the Quran. Obviously you want to understand it better and deeper, yes. But if you look aslan, the act of the Prophet ﷺ, now there were surahs, for example, we have a sahabiyya where she says, I memorized Surat Qaf from the Prophet ﷺ, from as much as he would recite it on the minbar on Friday. Yufassiruhu, and he would even explain it. So we know that entire khutbahs were tafsir of certain surahs, and that she was able to memorize it. So if she's able to memorize it, that means he was repeating it more than one Friday. It wasn't just that one Friday. If it was one Friday, can you remember an entire khutbah or an entire surah from just hearing it once? That's very hard. But if he was repeating it, obviously this is clear. So we get the notion that he did do tafsir. It's not that he didn't do. But did he do tafsir for every verse in the Quran? No. Does that make sense? I hope inshallah ta'ala that this is clear. The companions as well. For example, we said some of the major companions, Abdullah ibn Abbas, right? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, I think, is severely underrated in terms of his role as a mufassir as well. He himself says about himself, remember, these are people that are not used to boasting, but he used to say, there is not a verse except that I know where it was revealed, when it was revealed, and whether it was revealed bilaylin aw nahar, whether it was in the daytime or at night. So think about that's yani, a level of detail that you're like, what? Why does that even matter, whether it was revealed in the day or in the night? But he's trying to tell people how much he has recollection of a lot of these things. However, even though he said that, do we have access to all of his information directly to him? We don't. He had his own mushaf, right? He wrote in the Hamish, right? But this is lost because he burned it. 100%. But is it verbatim, word for word? No. Not that information. So here's the thing. Here's what I'm getting to this point. It's not that information is lost. La. But does the chain always go back to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? La. Or even Abdullah ibn Abbas. So like if you go to one of these bookstores and you find a book that says Tafsir ibn Abbas or Tafsir ibn Mas'ud, they never authored books themselves, right? They didn't write these things. What happened was these are compilations of their students and what they did. Does that make sense? So does that mean that it's 100% just from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? You could say that. I mean, obviously they're trying to say that. But Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Abdullah ibn Abbas, neither of them actually authored any books. Does that make sense? So it's all from their students, and sometimes it's even the students of the students. So the next generation is why we're here. Why? Because most of what we know about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas and others, not just them two, is actually from their students. Right? The Tabi'een specifically. So for example, Mujahid and Qatada, both of them, were main students of Ibn Abbas. And both of them are records saying that we sat down with him and we went through the Quran word for word with him. So now here's when we get into the tafsir that we're used to, right? So if you look at the generation of the Prophet ﷺ, he never did that. But now we're getting into, they went through the Quran. He says, أسأله عن كل كلمة. Qatada is on record saying, I used to ask him about every word. And then he says, وَفَعَلْتُهُ ثَلَث مَرَاتٍ. I did this 3 different times. Okay, not in a row. This is, sometimes there would be years gap, which means that maybe Abdullah ibn Abbas himself is also getting new insights. He's talking to other people. He's getting new information that maybe he didn't have access to, etc. You know what I mean? So he did that 3 times to go through, and then he recorded that. So a lot of times when they say, if you open up any book of tafsir, Al-Qurtubi, Al-Tabari, especially these classic ones, right? Like Al-Tabari, he'll be like, Qatada says this, Mujahid says this. When you have these people that are students of somebody like Ibn Abbas, that it's going, actually they got it from Ibn Abbas. And sometimes they would differ with each other, which means that Ibn Abbas was probably giving him a different answer than him at one point. But you look, and we'll talk about what type of difference this is, how that اختلاف تنوع وليس اختلاف تضاد. Right? So from a linguistic point of view, we say this is a difference that is the type of variety, but not that it's clashing, right? It does not contradict one another. They're not differences that contradict, they're just differences and we have some examples of this. Okay? The Tabi'een, however, when we look, so when you see these names, right, and you in the books of tafsir, and you see that it's one of the Tabi'een, you know that this is generally trustworthy. That's a good opinion to take. You'll see like a Sha'bi, you'll see others, Al-Dhahak, you'll see, and these are generally names that are good source, and we have documentation going back to them, is what I'm saying. So usually the books of tafsir, really tafsir as a genre that we understand it, started with their generation. And this is why, like many scholars have said, if the Tabi'een, these successors, are generally unanimous about something, take it. Don't even, this is good to take, you should apply it. There's no need to even doubt its authenticity, even if it just goes back to them. Because if they're in agreement on something, obviously they had to get it from somewhere. They're not just making it up. And then he says, if they do differ, and a lot of times they will, we should not use the statements of one of them against the other. This is what he's saying. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying this. So you don't say, oh, I like Qatada more because he said there, or like, no, there's no need. But he says you should evaluate it not according to them as individuals, but evaluate it according to why they say what they say. So a lot of times he'll say this word means this. Like in the Quran, it's an ambiguous word. We don't really know what it means. And if he doesn't have any supporting evidence for why he says that, okay, take it as is. But if someone else from the Tabi'een says it means this, and this is what the poet has says, كما قال الشاعر, and then he uses poetry. A lot of times you'll find this in books of tafsir. If he uses proof for him, and you see, okay, that poetry makes sense, it's classical poetry, it predates, meaning it's not poetry that he made up to support his evidence, it's known classical poetry, then you take it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. And this is what a lot of times they would do, right? So this is with regards to the Tabi'een. Any questions on this? I think it's pretty much straightforward. Now, so this is source number 4. Source number 5 is to do tafsir according to the principles of the Arabic language, which, if you look, is a lot of times what they themselves would do. Even Abdullah ibn Abbas, because like I said, we know for sure that he didn't. For sure, we know this, and this might sound controversial, but in fact, it's not. We know for sure that he didn't get everything that he's doing tafsir of directly from the Prophet ﷺ himself. Right? Why? The Prophet obviously he says, وَعَلِّمْهُ التَّأْوِيلَ, and teach him. Meaning the Prophet didn't teach him this, he's getting it from his insight, from his knowledge of Arabic, from other companions, from putting things together, the context, etc., which we'll talk about. Which means that after we go through all of the people that came, well, not all of the people, but especially those sources that we just talked about, and then after this, we want to apply principles of Arabic language. This is why knowledge of Arabic is key to doing tafsir. Now, if you don't know, then obviously you can rely on somebody who has done this as well in order to give it to you as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran in Arabic. This is clear. إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Indeed, we have revealed it, a Quran in Arabic, in order for you ta'qilun. That means you understand. You apply your intellect. And then he says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. And we have not sent down any messenger except that he speaks the languages of his people to state clearly for them. Which means that we have to know that this Quran was sent down in the language of a people. So understanding those people. So a lot of times we do have to understand Arabic culture directly to understand the context of things. We have to understand Arabic language because you can't separate language from culture. You can't separate language from history. You can't separate. These things are intertwined. There's an intersection. A lot of these are related and they're inseparable, right? And so learning about Arabic and its culture and its history is not a problem. It doesn't mean that necessarily Arabs are superior to anybody else. It's actually key to understanding the Quran better, inshallah ta'ala. Okay? So principles of the Arabic language are extremely important. This is why I'm always surprised when you have translations. So I don't know if you guys know that. Oh, you're going to ask a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, so far we have 5. People who like translate the Quran without knowing Arabic. So there's a translation that came out in English, but the author, this is recent, this is a few years ago, but the author does not know Arabic. And he says this, I don't know Arabic. And everybody was like, okay, so how did you translate it? And he translated it from Urdu into English. Okay. That's fine, but clarify that. Because it does look a little bit different. So what is he translating? Which we'll talk about translation. What he's translating is a translation of a tafsir, a basic tafsir, from that language into English. If it's marketed as that, ahlan wa sahlan, not a problem. I'm sure that tafsir is fine, that translation is fine. But to say that it's a direct translation can be extremely problematic. Because if you do compare it, it doesn't look like some of the other translations. Yeah, 100%. It's a natural progress, yes. Basically, he's calling it a translation of the Quran, but it's a translation of a tafsir, really. Yeah, the translation is in Urdu. Yeah, so he's translating a translation. Yeah, he's translating a translation, which is, it's. So, Naam.
If the Quran doesn't have something in it that explains itself,
Yes.
step two would be the Arabic language?
No, the hadith, the sunnah, like we said.
Okay, so
If there is a hadith, like I said, the Prophet ﷺ didn't do a tafsir of everything. And if you look directly, what the Prophet ﷺ commented on directly, it's not that much.
okay, so
And not that much at all. And when I'm saying not that much,
if there is no hadith, then where do you go? Do you go to
companions, and the successors, see what they said. It doesn't mean they have to agree with them, but you have to at least see what they said. You understand what I'm saying?
so the sequence you're using is really priority. So the Arabic language comes last, or almost.
Because they applied Arabic language. But what we're saying is, let's look at how they applied it first. But aslan, all of them are doing this. What we're talking about is applying the principles of Arabic language. So for example, there's a whole entire, right now there's a book, because we found the manuscript for this. There's a book. It is, actually I have it here. I'll find it. It's an amazing book. So it was written by an Egyptian. It was compiled. She did tahqiq for it. It's a she. So her name is Bint al-Shati. Has anybody heard of her? Aisha bint Abdul Rahman. She passed away a few years ago, rahimahullah. PhD. She's a professor of Quranic studies. She's Egyptian. Brilliant, right? So I read her book cover to cover. And she talks about the miraculousness of the Quran. And then the second part of this book that I read was the manuscript of one of the I can't remember his name now, but he's one of the Khawarij, which is controversial. But he's one of the Khawarij who sat down with Abdullah ibn Abbas, and he asked him about verses that he, as a person, did not know the meaning of. He says, what does this mean? And every time Abdullah ibn Abbas would respond to him, he would tell him what it means, and then his proof was a verse of poetry. Alam tasma' qawl al-sha'ir. Did you not hear the statement of the poet? And then he recites poetry to him. And he says, 80 ayah, 80 verses, all over the Quran, from beginning to end, 80 verses that this guy didn't know. But it shows you, like, even though he's a Kharijite, which is controversial, right? But it shows you that he was sincere, he wanted to learn. And he recognized Abdullah ibn Abbas as an authority. And Abdullah ibn Abbas wasn't telling him just to take it on because I'm Ibn Abbas, but here's my proof for it. And his proof was always poetry. He did not say, the Prophet ﷺ said. He did not say, Allah says. He says, look at this verse of poetry, and then when you apply this meaning in the verse, it makes sense. So, which is why step number 6 is context. And we're going to get into what does context mean. There's two.
One of the people, she said, you really cannot say it's tafsir al-Quran. What it says, al-murad fi hadhihi al-ayah, not tafsir. I think she made that quote. She's one of the ulama, or
Yeah.
scholars, the one they said. She said it's not really proper for us to say tafsir, because the Quran is in the Arabic language, but what's the context of the ayah, what the murad min hadhihi al-ayah.
I don't remember that part, to be honest.
I think that's one for
Because he does use that. I mean, they use that, al-murad, what's wanted, what's intended. But that's, if I'm telling you this is what's intended, that's a tafsir. How is that different than tafsir?
Even there is an athar from Umar radiallahu anhu
Naam.
that he wanted to know what's the real meaning of fatir. Fatir is samawat.
Naam.
And he himself,
He didn't.
Umar radiallahu anhu, he didn't
Naam.
know what fatir meant. And then he went to the badia, where you can see
Yeah.
the Arab, the
Uh-huh.
Bedouins, those. So he knows that this is where the origin of the Arabic language is. And if he'd hear people saying this word, then he would understand it. So he saw two Bedouins fighting over a well, water well, a spring. And one guy is telling the other one, هي لي وأنا فطرتها ولم تك شيئا. This well is really for me. أنا فطرتها.
Yeah.
I created it in a sense. ولم تك شيئا.
But I split it. Yeah, I opened it. Yeah.
Why Imam Shafi'i, to learn authentic Arabic, he went to
Al-Badu, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to go to the.
So that is this is the why also the Arabic language as spoken by the others. Yani even
Yeah.
Umar radiallahu anhu, you just
Yeah.
imagine.
الشعر الجاهلي الله سبحانه وتعالى 500 600 years before القرآن ربنا arranged الشعر الجاهلي ليكون حاضنا معاني القرآن.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I found the book, the PDF. It's Nafi' ibn al-Azraq. That's the name of the Khariji. His name is Nafi' ibn al-Azraq. And then he founded a whole movement called al-Azariqa. That they became later, not this time, later on they became very violent. But during this time he came to Mecca and he was learning with Ibn Abbas. And his masail, so like he would come and he would ask him, yeah, but he would ask him questions. In the beginning, it seems like he wants to learn. But Ibn Abbas would use poetry to explain to him, right? So like for example, he says, أخبرني عن قول الله تعالى وابتغوا إليه الوسيلة. ما الوسيلة؟ فقال ابن عباس القربة. قال فيه عنترة. مين عنترة؟ عنترة بن شداد الشاعر الجاهلي. أن العدو لهم إليك وسيلة أن يأخذوك تكحلي وتخضبي. Okay. فقال الوسيلة الحاجة. Al-Qurba. That's it. And then where is it? And then he shows the places where it is al-wasila. وَابْتَغُوا إِلَيْهِ الْوَسِيلَ إِلَى آخِرِهِ. You know what I mean? And then that's it. And then وَهَكَذا. So there's actually over 100 here that he mentions, right? Aisha bint Abdul Rahman, she uses this to show that they understood this basic concept, which is using Arabic and especially old poetry to support that meaning. Nowadays when we hear al-wasila, we understand, al-qurba, which means to get close. It's a method to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. So yes, and then understanding, the Bedouin language, how they speak, obviously are all key. So that's number 5. Number 6 is the context, meaning the verse itself. That's textual context. Then there's historical context, meaning asbab al-nuzul, etc. Right? Because without that, you'll have no clue what's going on. Also, you could misunderstand a verse. Yeah. The textual context. So where is it? You know what I mean? What surah? What's going on before? What's going on afterwards? We know that that's a method of tafsir because the Prophet ﷺ actually used that when responding to some questions, right? So when Aisha radiallahu anha, she asks the Prophet ﷺ, he says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْتُونَ مَا أَتَوْا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ وَجِلَةٌ أَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Okay? So she says, what does this verse mean? It's confusing by itself. It says, and the people who do what they do while their hearts are trembling, they're afraid. She says, are these the sinners? Like, why are they, if they're sinning, why are they afraid? And it doesn't make sense. And then he tells her, look at what came before it, right? The verses before actually talk about people who are doing good. It's actually righteous people. And Allah is describing them, and that He mentions that they do what they do. This is not sins, these are good deeds. Wajila, they're not terrified, but they're trembling. They're anxious. Why? Because they're afraid that Allah is not accepting from them. Not the other way around. She understood it as, because He says, in Arabic, when you say, oh, you do what you do, if I don't want to name what you do, usually we understand it's negative. Oh, you're doing that thing. You know what I mean? Kind of way. Like, if I'm not mentioning it, that means generally understood as negative. That's how she understood it. But in fact, Allah is mentioning they do what they do, meaning here it means a positive. They're doing what they do. It's hidden. They have hidden good deeds, which is obviously good for everybody to have. But that they're trembling because they're afraid that Allah might not accept their good deeds. So he used context, textual context, to prove to Aisha that this is what it means. And this is, obviously, he's also demonstrating this is a method of tafsir, to use the textual context. And then, obviously, historical context is important. Like I said, asbab al-nuzul, using asbab al-nuzul. We cannot divorce asbab al-nuzul from the science of tafsir, right? At all. With that said, do we know why every verse was revealed? No. How much do we know? يعني, it's not that little. Out of over 6,000 verses of the Quran, it's estimated. So in the first book ever dedicated to the science of tafsir is by Al-Wahidi. Asbab al-Nuzul by Al-Wahidi. Right? 400 and change Hijriya is when he wrote his book. As a dedicated volume. Now here, if you look in like a Tirmidhi and in Bukhari and others, they actually have Asbab al-Nuzul built, but not as its own genre. It wasn't its own topic. This guy Al-Wahidi was the first person to say, here's why these verses were revealed. He lists 500 verses. So out of 6,000, you're taught roughly, he's listing 500 verses that are there. This is roughly what? Between 8 and 10% of the Quran that there's specific reference that Al-Wahidi records. Now, Al-Wahidi was not, what's the word that I'm looking for? He didn't compile everything. Afterwards, there's other scholars that came, culminating with Al-Imam al-Suyuti, rahimahullah. Suyuti, as we know, very famous compiler. So he says, Lubab al-Nuqul fi Asbab al-Nuzul. He has that big book, and he has almost 1,000 in there. So now we're getting a higher number. Now we're up to 20%, in which he's recording something that's been there, that knows. Now, he even has, if you look at his book, Ulum al-Quran, huge book, a lot of the information there is merely that information. And a lot of times you're like, why? So he would list like, الآيات التي نزلت في النهار, الآيات التي نزلت في الليل, الآيات التي نزلت في الشتاء, الآيات التي نزلت في الصيف. And you're just like, what? You know, the verses that were revealed in the night, the verses that were revealed in the day, the verses that were revealed in the summer, the verses that were revealed in winter. It's like, well, okay. He's recording these as qila, it's been said. But a lot of that is not authentic, meaning it's been said, okay, it's nice to know, but we don't know how authentic it is. How does that help in understanding the verse? A lot of that's not even clear. You know what I mean? Regardless of what. But he's just narrating that this has been said, so there's a lot of detail about certain verses and whatnot, but many times we don't know. He tried, and many scholars have tried as well, to list the order in which the surahs were revealed. None of that is authentic. Just to be clear. So if a person says, the first surah that was revealed, Iqra, yes, a lot of scholars actually say this, but guess what? Is there dissension? Yeah, there is. There's some scholars who dissent. They say, no, we actually, and some hold that was Surah Al-Fatiha that was the first that was revealed. And they have proof, right? You can't necessarily discount it. Although the majority, since the majority accepts that it was Iqra, we say that it's Iqra, and that's not a problem. You can say that. Does that make sense? But after Iqra, you'll find they say, okay, next was Al-Fatiha. Some people put Al-Fatiha number 4. Some people put Al-Fatiha number 7. Some scholars have even said that Al-Fatiha was not revealed until Medina, until Al-Hijrah. And just like, how were they praying up until then? It doesn't make sense sometimes. But they have qil. Somebody said it, yani, from these historical scholars. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt. We can't be definitive with these things. So you'll open up sometimes books of tafsir, and the Mufassir will say, وَهِيَ مثلا like Surah Al-Takwir. إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ. This surah. And you'll open up, I think in At-Tabari and some others, and they'll say, وَهِيَ سَابِعْ سُورَةٌ أُنزِلَتْ. This is what it's been said. It's the 7th surah that was revealed. Qil, it's been said. Okay, is there any proof? Is this authentic? We don't know. We have no idea. But it's early Meccan. Okay, so generally speaking, we know like Meccan, Madani, we do know this, right, for the most part. Beyond this, there are, from Asbab al-Nuzul, we can figure out, but the ones that we don't have Asbab al-Nuzul for, we can make educated guesses, but we don't generally know. I just wanted to make that clear, inshallah ta'ala, so that people know where we're coming from, inshallah ta'ala. Does that make, I hope, inshallah ta'ala, that makes sense. With regards to Asbab al-Nuzul, we'll mention a few examples. Do you guys want some examples? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تحسبن الذين يفرحون بما أتوا ويحبون أن يحمدوا بما لم يفعلوا فلا تحسبنهم بمفازة من العذاب ولهم عذاب أليم. Okay? And never think, this is the translation, this is from Surah Al Imran, and never think that those who rejoice in what they have perpetrated and like to be praised for what they did not do, never think them to be in safety from the punishment, and for them is a painful punishment. Yeah, they like to get credit, but they're Yes, but the beginning of the verse is also dangerous. It says that those who rejoice in what they have done, right? يَفْرَحُونَ بِمَا أَتَوْا. They're happy because of what they've done. So Marwan said to Rafi' that he needs to go to Abdullah ibn Abbas. Now this whole narration, this story is in Sahih Muslim. And he said, ask him the following. If every one of us is to be punished for being happy for a good deed and for him being praised for what he has not done, nobody would be saved from al-adhab, from the torment. If I do a good deed, let's say I went to Hajj and I'm happy, or I did Ramadan and I was happy, or I did Salah and I was happy, ما أكلت هوا. يعني astaghfirullah. He's like, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be punished. What does this? You have to ask him, what does this mean? So this shows that even politicians, at least back in those days, were concerned. This is Marwan. Marwan al-Hakam, at one point he was the ruler. So Ibn Abbas tells Rafi', he says, what do you have to do with this verse? وَمَا بَالُكُمْ فِي هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ. He says, this is not talking about you, aslan. He says, هذه نزلت في أهل الكتاب. And the clue to this is that's in Surah Al-Imran. Right? Not a majority, but a lot of Al-Imran, a huge portion of it is actually talking about the people of the book. And he says, this verse, نزلت في أهل الكتاب. It's referring to the people of the book and not referring to Muslims. Right? And if you look at the context and everything else, they're like, oh, okay, alhamdulillah. Because if it was talking about Muslims, none of us would be safe. And then he says, and then he starts reciting other verses. And he recited the verse, 2 verses before. So this verse is 188. He starts reciting 186. So what's 186? He says, وَلَا تَسْمَعُنَّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا أَذًى كَثِيرًا. And he's talking about the people who came before. I'm sorry, 187. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ لَتُبَيِّنُنَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَهُ فَنَبَذُوهُ وَرَاءَ ظُهُورِهِمْ وَاشْتَرَوْا بِهِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا فَبِئْسَ مَا يَشْتَرُونَ. So it's talking about, this is 187. The next one is لَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ يَفْرَحُونَ بِمَا أَتَوْا. Right? It's talking about the people of the book.
If we took the siyaq of the ayah,
The context.
completely would make a big difference than just take one ayah.
Exactly, yes.
You take before and after, and that will take
The context, right? And then he said, Abdullah ibn Abbas then further says, he says that the Prophet ﷺ himself asked them about something, the Ahlul Kitab, and they concealed it, فَكَتَمُوهُ. And this is why he says, لَتُبَيْنُنَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَهُ. So they did hide a lot of knowledge. And in fact, they did this with their own people too, where they withheld knowledge and they did not give it to the people. Until today, it's sahih.
They say, don't read this part.
Yeah. Don't read this part.
Don't read this part. I will read this part.
Yeah.
And you would say,
Why?
why?
It's all, it's guidance. So they concealed it and they told him something else and they went out and they thought that they had informed him as a lie. And they felt happy about what they did. This is why. So Abdullah ibn Abbas now directly is saying that they felt happy, right? Because كتموا البينات. And then he says, لا تحسبن الذين يفرحون بما أتوا. So he says, do not assume that those people are happy because of what they did, right? So it's clearly talking about the people of the book. He says, does not concern you as a Muslim. Don't worry about it. It's talking about them. Very good. Without asbab al-nuzul, somebody might have misunderstood, especially taking a verse, because a lot of times what do? We take a verse out of context and we just recite one verse. Here's the verse, khud, here's an ayah, or here's a hadith. We drop an H-bomb. Here's a hadith, brother. Take it, but there's no context or anything. So this gives a problem. Obviously, there's a lot that can be said about asbab al-nuzul. It gives us, knowing asbab al-nuzul, gives us a particular incident. But the question now becomes, just because it was revealed for that particular incident, does that mean that it doesn't apply to other incidents? لا. Right? العبرة ليس العبرة بعموم اللفظ وليس بخصوص السبب. So there's a qaida that says the lesson is about umum al-lafz, meaning the broad nature of the text, what it means in general, and not just the particulars of that particular incident. The particular incident is to demonstrate the practicality of what was happening, but in fact, the general statement is to be understood. So for example, in Surah Al-Mujadala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا وَتَشْتَكِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Allah has heard, the speech of the one who argues with you concerning her husband and directs her complaint to Allah. وَاللَّهُ يَسْمَعُ تَحَاوُرَكُمَا, and Allah hears your dialogue. إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the hearing and the seeing. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So, for this verse to be revealed for that particular incident, it tells us that Allah heard her. However, does that mean that Allah won't hear any other wife, for example, going through a problem with her husband? Allah will. And Allah knows. Does that mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hears everything? Of course, we know that. But He's saying that He's listening to her. He's accommodating her. He's, there's a rahmah that happens, this sama'. It's not just a general one, which is important for us as well. And then He reveals rules about dhihar, and we understand that these rules are applied to everybody. Sometimes knowing asbabun nuzul helps us to avoid problematic understandings as well. For example, Marwan, who we just talked about before, wanted to use a verse against his political opponents. And he says, this verse, وَالَّذِي قَالَ لِوَالِدَيْهِ أُفٍّ لَكُمَا أَتَعِدَانِنِي. Okay, and the one who says to his parents, "Uff to you, do you promise me that I will be brought forth?" قَدْ خَلَتِ الْقُرُونُ مِنْ قَبْلِي إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ. So he says that this is talking about an insolent, disrespectful child to his parents. And he says, هذه الآية نزلت في عبد الرحمن بن أبي بكر. This verse was revealed to Abdul Rahman, the son of Abu Bakr. At the time, there was some political strife and whatnot, and he wanted to show how this person is insignificant, he doesn't have any say, etc., because Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr was in the company of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Marwan was in the company of Muawiyah. This is even after the time, after the time of Muawiyah and Ali, but he's still trying to make a political thing about it. And so his statement, he said it in public, ala al-mala'. People then, they started to go to companions who knew who this is talking about. They said, who is this talking about? So here it's also demonstrative that they are applying the same principles that we should apply. So they said, okay, if we don't know the particular person, let's go to the people who knew. So they went to a companion. They go to the companions. At the time, Aisha radiallahu anha is still alive. They go to Aisha. They ask her, Ya al-Mu'minin, who's this talking about? Now, Abdul Rahman is her brother. A person could say, okay, she's biased, maybe she wants to show his innocence, but she said, La, this is clearly not him. It's not talking about him at all. Aslan, he wasn't even born when this verse was revealed. She clarifies to everybody, which is correct. He was born afterwards. He's not a companion. Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr was born after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So she said, there's no way that it could have been him because he wasn't even born yet. This is talking about a completely different person. And she completely obliterated that argument. Even though she is biased, but her bias was cleared because there's no ambiguity about that. Does that make sense? So going to a person of knowledge who knows when the verse was revealed, when this person was born, etc., and then they couldn't refute that. Okay? I'm going through, I'm looking through my own research paper that I did on this topic that I wrote a while ago about some of the benefits of Asbab al-Nuzul. One, like Az-Zarqani, he mentions that it helps actually people memorize the Quran because you can put a context to the verse and deeper understanding. There's a lot of benefits, obviously. Yeah, there's a lot that can be. Oh yeah, As-Safa wal Marwa, this is a great example of context. Because without knowing when it was revealed, you would be completely lost. I think I mentioned that one in a khutbah one time. Because if you read the verse by itself, it does not make any sense. Right? So what's the verse? إِنَّ الصَّفَا وَالْمَرْوَةَ مِنْ شَعَائِرِ اللَّهِ فَمَنْ حَجَّ الْبَيْتَ وَاعْتَمَرَ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يَطَّوَّفَ بِهِمَا وَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ وَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ شَاكِرٌ عَلِيمٌ. Right? So he says, indeed, as-Safa wal Marwa are from the rituals, the rites of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whoever does Hajj or does Umrah, there is no blame upon him should he do the tawaf, the sa'i between them. So the people came, later on, people came to Aisha, I think in that hadith, they came to Aisha and they said, this verse doesn't make any sense. Why would there be sin if I do Safa and Marwa? Right? And she says this verse was revealed back when there were still idols on both the Safa wal Marwa, and some of the companions who were able to go and do Umrah, right, before obviously the Fath, were concerned. They're like, how can we do, should we do Sa'i? And the Prophet ﷺ, then he said, we'll ask, and Allah reveals this. And he says, there's no blame upon you to do Sa'i. So there's a deeper question now to be asked, specifically about this one. Since the Quran is eternal, right, why would this verse still remain in the Quran? Because it doesn't apply to us directly. It doesn't apply directly. Why is it still there?
So we should study the Quran.
Yes. Exactly. Does that make sense? For us to study the Quran and to study the history. It's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us the key to understanding the Quran is the historical context. Without the historical context, you have no idea. You cannot understand this book. This is why there's so many verses that are exactly like this. They can only be understood within the historical context, because without it, it's as if he's tying it directly. So the Quran is not only an eternal book in that way, but he's also telling you, go back to your history and understand what was going on, because that will help you so much insight. Because if you just like if it was to be an eternal verse without it, would have just said inna safa al-marwa min sha'airillah. That's it, and we wouldn't have the rest of the verse. You know what I mean? Not necessarily. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His eternal knowledge knows that, and He wants you to go back and understand the history and how there was a graduality and how there were idols, etc., and how there's not a problem. You could still do that. So this is something that I think a person should understand, inshallah ta'ala. Naam? Oh yeah, of course. It shows also as well that the Prophet ﷺ was careful and he was honest in his integrity in conveying the Quran as he received it. He didn't change it. He didn't do anything else upon those ideas. Very good. طيب. Any questions on this so far? Let me go.
There's an أثر from Abu Bakr رضي الله عنه.
نعم.
يا أيها الناس إنكم تقرؤون آية وتضعونها في غير موضعها.
صحيح.
So Abu Bakr رضي الله عنه says, oh people, يا أيها الناس, you read an ayah in the Quran and you're gonna put it in or you're gonna interpret it in a different manner.
صحيح.
تضعونها في غير موضعها. ثم تلا
What was the verse? يا أيها الذين آمنوا عليكم أنفسكم لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم.
Or you who believe, you just worry about your own selves. Those who are misguided, man ضل, those who are misguided are not going to hurt you. Nothing's going to hurt you if you are on the right path.
صحيح.
So he said, you think that this is really, you have, if you read this ayah as if it's telling you that don't worry about others as long as you are on the straight path.
Yep.
And the hadith continues, or the author continues to say, لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَتَنْهُنَّ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. So you shall enjoin ma'roof. You should لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and then you should وَلَتَنْهُنَّ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. وَإِلَّا اللَّهَ لَا يَسْحَتُكُمْ بِعَذَابٍ, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish you with a severe punishment.
Yep.
So actually the ayah is true. If you read it, it sounds like, يا الذين آمنوا لا يضركم لا يضركم
من ضل إذا اهتديتم.
It's very, very clear. Those who are misguided, they're not going to hurt you as long as you're on the right path.
Yep.
So it's very important.
Regarding the abrogation of science, can you clarify that part? Is there any such thing?
Yeah. So abrogation in the Quran, al-nasakh. So the Quran itself refers to abrogation and naskh, right? The difference comes in how do we understand it and how do we apply it. Because like everything else, it comes down to application, not necessarily the existence of it, right? Even the people who claim that there's no naskh, they didn't negate naskh as the concept, they negated it being as explicit as other groups that had it, right? Because if the Quran is referring to it, you can't negate it. You can't say that it doesn't exist. Because it says, وَمَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Right? It's as if like, how can you doubt that Allah can do anything? He can do anything, so He can design His book the way that He wants to design it. So here he says, we do not abrogate مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ, any verse, أَوْ نُنْسِهَا, or we cause it to be forgotten. And what does that mean? Right? So now we have different categories of abrogation and of an-nisyan here, this idea of forgetfulness, right? To be forgotten. And were any verses completely forgotten? Right? And the answer is, not really. No, it's not that we don't know. We actually do know. But they're not in the Quran anymore. They're not in the Mus'haf that we have. But we actually have.
That was at the time of the Prophet.
Yeah, of course. So all of this, we can't come back now and say, oh, I'm going to update the Quran. No, a'udhu billah, obviously. But this actually did cause some conflict between the companions that a lot of people don't realize did kind of exist. Because of this. And these might seem like a little controversial, but aslan the controversy was ended during the lifetime of the Sahaba. What people like to do to question the integrity of the Quran, especially these Western scholars, is to go back to the statements of the companions and be like, look, we're like, okay, yes, they differed, but then they resolved it. This is not this is a done deal 1400 years ago.
They use this argument too to say, you say that the Quran, not one ayah is taken out. Yeah.
But it was taken out during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not afterwards. So this is a deeper topic. I mean, we can mention examples. There are entire surahs that have been removed. Right? One of them is Surah Al-Hafd. And we know that it's called Surah Al-Hafd, right? Because companions still had it memorized. Small surah. This is a short surah that it's probably going to be in Juz' Amma if it were there, right? What's funny is that some scholars will still recite it where? Yeah, I know, this is a little controversial. However, this is recorded in a Sahih. This is in Sahih Muslim. I'm not bringing you like a different book. This is in our own books of Sunnah, right? Where do they recite it? Does anybody know? Actually, where? They recite it in the Qunut. Because aslan it is a dua, aslan, this whole surah. So it says, Allahumma iyyaka na'bud, wa laka nusalli wa nasjud, wa ilayka nas'a wa nahfad. Right, so it's called Surah Al-Hafd because it has this, right? Allahumma iyyaka na'bud wa laka nusalli wa nasjud wa iyyaka nas'a wa nahfad. And then it continues on. There's a few. Yeah, exactly. That used to be a surah, and then later it was removed. It was removed, and it's not like people doubt whether it was removed or not. Everybody became unanimous that it was removed. Because it was explicitly from the Prophet ﷺ. This is how we know what's there and what's not. Right? Whatever the Prophet ﷺ would recite, and he would stop reciting, khalas. This is why Umar, and it shows you the integrity of the Sahaba. So the famous example is Ayat al-Rajm. Right? The verses of stoning the adulterer. Right? Umar radiallahu anhu, standing on the minbar. He stands on the minbar, and he says, لولا أن يقول الناس زاد عمر في القرآن لكتبتها بيدي. He says, if it weren't for the fact that people would say that Umar is adding verses to the Quran, I would have written it myself with my own hands because I still remember it. وَالشَّيْخُ وَالشَّيْخَةُ فَرْجُمُوهُمَا الْبَتَّةِ. Yeah, there's more. These are examples. Yes, we used to recite, and she mentions this. Yeah. But even Aisha, so there's more controversial things beyond this. But we don't want to keep it too controversial. But these are things that we find, right? Especially with regards to abrogation. So Umar, going back to the example that we mentioned with Umar, the idea of stoning, right? An adulterer, an adulteress, because an adulterer and an adulteress are people who are obviously married when they commit zina. They're not single. It's not fornication. Fornication has its own, the punishment is mentioned in the Quran. But this one is talking about people who are married, right? And so Umar, showing the integrity, because he's what? What is Umar doing? He's foreseeing that this can be a problem. Why? Because he knows people later on are going to come and they're going to say, why should we apply this when it's not in the Quran? No, we're not going to apply it. And Umar knows, and it was already being said during his time that لا نجد هذا في كتاب الله. We don't find this in the book of Allah, we're not going to do it. And it says because of this, he was saying, I want to write it. I want to put it in the Quran so that people don't doubt it, but it's the Quran, I can't add anything to it. It's been taken out. But they used to recite it and they take it out. So the question now is, why would this happen aslan to begin with? Why would there be a verse that was in and then now it's taking out? But we still apply it. So there's 4 categories of verses with regards to abrogation, right? Category number 1. Ones that we abrogate applying them, but we still recite them. So this is like the verses that talk about يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are drunk until, so that you know what you're saying. طيب, none of us are ever going to be drunk, inshallah ta'ala, for the rest of our lives. So this verse does not apply to us. But we still recite it. There's a wisdom behind that. And we know what the wisdom is. He said, we apply the context. We know that the Prophet ﷺ is integrity, in applying it. And it gives us historical context in how the Quran was developed. And a tadrij, for us to know the wisdom that everything is piecemeal, right? There's graduality in legislation. So that Allah kept it for us is, I think, perfect. Right? It actually, when you think about it and you study it, you're like, this is amazing that this verse is still there, even though it doesn't apply directly, right? But it applies in so many other ways. So that's one. Then you have verses that are removed, like mansukhat al-tilawa walakin ma'mul biha. And this is that al-hukmu baqin. Right? So the abrogation happened in that the verse is no longer recited. It's no longer part of the Quran, but that we still do it. We still apply the application of it is still there. And obviously the prime example is the rajm. Now there's other examples, but this is the typical. Now what's the wisdom behind that? Is there a wisdom behind that? Which, by the way, has led to some controversies, especially in our modern day and age, when we have to fit in with the modern world, and people will tell you, stoning an adulterer is barbaric, etc. And then you tell them this is meant to be a deterrent. It's not really meant to, because it's impossible to apply. Getting 4 witnesses, who's going to get 4 witnesses? Yeah, and see that, you know what I mean? So when you see the wisdom of the Quran and how to apply it, doesn't, but anyways, the point is to be a deterrent, not anything else. Plus, Islam offers you so many alternatives. Right? When you tell the person, Yahi, don't go commit zina, just marry her. You can marry 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's that bad, ta'al, I'll get you married. Don't go and commit zina. Wallah, I will. If somebody comes to me and he's like, Sheikh, it's really bad, I'm going to commit, and he's already married, I'll tell him, ta'al, we'll find you somebody. We'll get you married. You understand what I'm saying? So Islam offers you so many alternatives, so many ways around it. It's clear that it does not want to apply it. In fact, so there was a Muslim scholar who did, he's like, yeah, he's... Wallahi, one time I had a guy call me at 11 p.m. and he's like, Sheikh, can we do a aqd over FaceTime? She's with me here in the car. It's really bad. Wallahi, he did. And I wish I was making this up. I'm not making this up. This is not in Memphis, so anybody start thinking about somebody that they know, this did not happen in Memphis. So I'm just... Anyways, what I'm saying is, clearly, when you study it, you understand that it doesn't want to, it's almost impossible to apply. There was a brother who actually did a study. He went through the books of history to see how many times through history was haddu zina actually applied in terms of rajm. Anybody want to venture a guess? Throughout.
Not the history,
No. I'm talking about history. Up until modern times. Modern times, when you hear like they did it in some... Lala, these don't count because they don't even know. They don't even know how to apply it. When you look at the circumstances, you're like, what the heck are you guys doing? Yeah, he said, I counted 4. And all of them were through admittance, meaning Al-i'tiraf, yes, they admitted, not that they were actually found through. There's not a single instance in entire Islamic history, in every book of records that you could find, where it ever happened that there were 4 witnesses. It's impossible. You know, even those are by al-i'tiraf. It's not by witnesses. This is what yani, from when you look at the details, but yani, they're misapplying it. You can't pick and choose what you're applying. Anyways, what I'm saying is. She's not a liable witness, also a reliable witness, because even according to people, everybody around her, none of her stories have been corroborated. Yani her whole thing has been destroyed. Anyways, but I know she makes those claims, and she was abused, and her family's like, no, we're wealthy, we're fine. Yani what? None of that actually matches yani the reality. She's just paid yani to write a book. If you guys, by the way, yani along these lines, if somebody wants to make a lot of money. This is a very easy way to make money. Of course, yani, you'll lose your share in the hereafter. You'll end up in the hellfire. A'udhu billah, may Allah protect us all. But these people who write, like an ex-Muslim who writes a book, you're guaranteed millions of dollars. So I'm just telling you by now. Oh yeah. And it's come out that they were paid. Yani, it's a $300 million industry annually. Yani, to spread yani Islamophobia. Especially yani, the people who lie about it. So anyway, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and protect us. Any questions on this, on the abrogation or anything else? طيب, okay, inshallah ta'ala. We'll start next week. We'll start in inshallah ta'ala with the tafsir. And it'll be Tuesday, and we'll pray Maghrib here, inshallah ta'ala, at the new building. Bi-idhnillah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.